two forms respectively are Vapad and Trakata. We have made full-length videos about these forms before, so if you want more information about them, be sure to look at those. Vapad was a Jedi variant of the Sith lightsaber form of Form 7 known as Juya. As some of you may know, Juya was not so much of a lightsaber form as it was a state of mind. Its sequences were very difficult to master when you didn't have the right mental setting. You see, Form 7 was one that expressly uses the user's emotion to fuel their blade in combat, allowing for wild, unpredictable strikes and sudden explosions of movement. The preferred form of Darth Sidious and Darth Maul, Juya was pretty much the staple of Sith combat, and was completely forbidden for any Jedi to use as a direct affront of the Jedi Code. However, Vapad fixes this problem. Created by Mace Windu, Vapad doesn't use one's own emotions to channel into their blade strikes, but rather uses their opponent's emotions against them. This requires one to bring their own feelings to the surface, just barely going to the edge without tipping over to the dark side. In effect, Vapad reflects the opponent's darkness against them. This was an incredibly risky form to use though, as it demands for Vapad flirting with the dark side far beyond what many Jedi are comfortable with, causing many Jedi that saw Mace Windu use this to become concerned. After all, the fall of the Jedi Master Sora Bulk was due to the nature of Vapad, Sora Bulk being the co-creator of the form who helped develop it along with Mace Windu. Mace Windu has since refused to teach the form to any other Jedi, and it was outlawed by the Jedi Council unless Mace Windu's own discretion allowed some to train in it. To put it simply, Vapad is a unique lightsaber variant as both the Jedi and Sith hated it together. The Jedi believed that it went too far, and the Sith believed that it was a facsimile and an imitation, and that it did not go far enough. The other lightsaber form that both the Jedi and Sith hated was Trakata. Trakata was less of a form and more of a technique. It was the act of taking advantage of a lightsaber's ability to switch on and off, and doing so in the middle of a duel. For instance, one might pretend to go for an attack as an opponent is beginning to block it. One would then switch off their lightsaber, effectively bypassing the defenses of their opponent, and then reignite the blade into a vulnerable opponent's body. As you can imagine, the Jedi despised and dissuaded their students from using such a technique. The Jedi deemed it against their very code and unsportsmanlike. Ironically though, the Sith also despised this move, as they saw it as a cheap trick and a symbol of weakness. In the Sith's eyes, a true Sith Lord should be able to overpower an opponent with their strength in the dark side or skill with the blade, and using such a dirty trick was beneath even them. Funny enough, Trakata was actually invented by an unknown Jedi consular during the Old Republic era. Jedi consulars were mostly known for studying the Force, not the blade, and their philosophy of the wider galaxy, and not so much focusing at all on lightsaber combat. I imagine the consular found himself in an unexpected duel with a Sith, where the consular was totally outmatched at the blade, and was about to die or have someone else nearly killed. In the heat of the moment, the Jedi likely switched off his lightsaber right as the Sith attacked, causing him to stumble before the consular reignited his lightsaber into his enemy's back. After seeing how effective it was, he created an entire series of techniques around this idea, calling it Trakata. This story, though, is mostly speculation on our behalf. However, I do believe that this is a probable guess for its invention. Nevertheless, it is interesting how the Jedi and Sith come together on this one principle that despises its effectiveness. Trakata was a cheap and a dirty way to dispatch an opponent regardless of the scenario. However, this didn't stop a few Jedi from using these tricks from time to time when it best suited them, despite what the Jedi Masters and Councils had to say about it. Now within our video though, we are going to get into some moves which have to do with the marks of contact in lightsaber combat. You see, the way that the Jedi and Sith teach swordplay is divided into 9 different body zones, and the naming of each of these marks of contact on the body are different. From here, this is how they build their lightsaber techniques and form. But as you know, there are a few marks of contact that were looked down upon, and even one that was outright forbidden by use for a Jedi. The Jedi strived to ensure that if a fight was unavoidable, then it would have to be ended quickly and mercifully. As such, many of their preferred marks of contact made sure to focus on disarming an opponent, but if an opponent's death had to happen, then they would attempt to do it as painlessly as possible. This is where we get a technique that was actually despised by the Sith, but used by the Jedi. known as Cho Mai. Cho Mai was the mark of contact right at the wrist of an opponent's weapon hand, the favored point of contact for a Jedi. Cho Mai was the ideal way to end a fight, as the Jedi saw it as a merciful conclusion to any duel. By severing the opponent's hand, it effectively rendered the opponent unable to continue but still alive. Many Sith on the receiving end of Cho Mai were left full of hatred and a missing hand, whilst also denied a glorified death, and forced into humiliation of surrender and imprisonment by a Jedi. The Sith barely taught Cho Mai to their own apprentices, as
we help you through divorce by maximizing your time with your kids and maximizing your money. Give us a call.
useless. The fact is, if a Sith has decided to engage in combat, they don't intend for their opponent to be left alive. Due to this, any stroke that they make with their lightsaber is to be a killing blow and nothing less. The next mark of contact was highly looked down upon by the Jedi, and likely had to land you in hot water with the Council. This was known as Psi Talk. Psi Talk was the mark of contact at the waist, which would completely bisect an opponent into two pieces. In the book The Path of the Jedi, the Battlemaster, Garg Vonk, had this to say about Psi Talk. This act is rightly considered to be barbaric and evidence of furious emotions of the dark side. Unless you're fighting droids, no student of mine should ever use Psi Talk. As you may already know, this is the exact technique that Obi-Wan Kenobi used as a Padawan against Darth Maul at the end of their duel that we saw in The Phantom Menace, and of course, the result of Maul being cut in half. It's important to note that Maul survived this, but was in incredible agony afterward. So much pain, even though he used his Sith training to survive, it still cost him his very sanity. Psi Talk is not a merciful technique at all, which rendered it to be a preferred mark of contact by the Sith. They very much enjoyed this maneuver because they knew that using this on an opponent would not kill them immediately and leave them in great pain for a few moments before they ultimately succumbed to their injuries. The Sith invented a vertical form of Psi Talk that would see the user bisecting an opponent from the top down, making it one of the most deadly and looked down upon techniques in the Jedi Order. And finally, the last technique that we will be looking at today is a technique that was officially stamped by the Jedi High Council as a forbidden move. Once again, this was a move used by Obi-Wan Kenobi during his duel on Mustafar, known as Mo-Ki. Mo-Ki was the act of severing several limbs in one single sweep of the blade against an opponent. In a circular motion, taking out as many limbs as possible, Obi-Wan would perform a triple Mo-Ki on Anakin Skywalker, leaving him on the beach to die afterwards. Mo-Ki was forbidden as it was deemed to be completely unnecessary given the many other options of contact available for a Jedi to use. Obi-Wan was forced to use Mo-Ki as there was literally no other option on Mustafar, as Anakin had become far too powerful to continue fighting him. The only way to end it was to use his arrogance against him and pull off a move that would render him completely unable to fight as well as catch him off guard. When you really think about it, no real other option was available for Obi-Wan Kenobi at the time. If Obi-Wan had allowed Anakin to land, then he would have been annihilated, and Obi-Wan couldn't yet just outright kill him when he was in midair. The only option was to take him out of commission entirely. Thus, Mo-Ki was needed. It is interesting, though, that two of the forbidden techniques of lightsaber combat that we've discussed today were both used by what many consider to be the pinnacle of the Jedi in Obi-Wan. But anyway, my friends and Blade Masters, what do you think?
Honestly, I don't even know where to start. On the surface, you've got this.
Anakin's lightsaber form was terrifying, brutal, swift, and without mercy, but yet was still allowed in the Jedi Order. However, there were of course aspects of Anakin Skywalker's many duels that the Jedi Council found disturbing. During his climactic duel with Count Dooku, the Jedi Council believed that Anakin Skywalker had potentially gone too far. It's actually quite a well-documented lightsaber technique to remove an enemy's weapon hand. However, Anakin went the extra mile and removed both of Dooku's hands, including the one that was not currently holding his lightsaber, something that is considered highly dishonorable for a Jedi and was concerning for Anakin. However, there was far more aspects to Anakin's lightsaber form that the Jedi Council found, well, outright disturbing. So much so that for the brief amount of time before Order 66 was initiated, they considered outlawing it and banning it from the Jedi Order entirely. And today, let's break down down, open up a holocron, and explain why. Anakin Skywalker's desired lightsaber form as of the time of Revenge of the Sith was a Form 5 variant known as Jem-So. The other variant, known as Shien, mainly focused on deflecting blaster fire. However, Anakin took this a step further, wanting to incorporate the heavy power strikes and swiftness of mobility into a dueling-centric variant. Therefore, Jem-So. Anakin Skywalker is not the inventor of Jem-So, however many of the Council believe that he did in fact perfect it. Many Jedi before Anakin also utilized Jem-So or variants of this, such as the Battle Master at the time in Sindralic. Luke Skywalker would even go on to use Jem-So himself, as this would be his primary lightsaber form. Jem-So was in fact a Force ability developed by the Jedi and not by the Sith, as a direct response to heavy power strikes of those that used Form 7 lightsaber combat, Juya, being highly aggressive. Therefore, the Jedi Order needed something to counter this with heavy power strikes that would not lean too far into the dark side. What's important to note though is that many Jedi at the time believed that Jem-So went too far in combating Juya, and believed that it had become too aggressive and leaned too far into the gifts of the dark side, something that Anakin Skywalker effectively proved against his fight with Dooku on the Invisible Hand. But let's break it down further. What specifically about Jem-So did some Jedi think were too far and wanted it removed from the archives? The aspect that many pointed out as to why it was so concerning is because it was purely offensively minded and purely offensively based. Jedi that used Jem-So mounted a massive offensive attack to counter the more aggressive aspects of Sith dueling. It is well known that Jem-So is the most physically demanding of all of the lightsaber forms, as it essentially detailed breaking down an enemy's offense with a superior offense yourself. Jem-So was developed during an era where the most widely prolific lightsaber form was Form 3 Surisu, used by our very own Obi-Wan Kenobi. Also known as the all-defensive form, this came in an era where the Sith were prevalent throughout the galaxy, and because of this, many Jedi were losing their encounters with Sith, who were basically too brutal and too offensive-minded, with the defenses of the Jedi eventually crumbling. A major complaint of Surisu was that it simply prolonged the inevitable being the Sith's superiority in striking down a Jedi, and therefore the Jedi of this era went back to the drawing board and came up with Jem-So. Where Jem-So was supposed to differ from the likes of Juya is Juya was more of a mindset than anything else. Juya involved directly using a utilizer's emotions and their hatred to fuel their blade. Although there were exact sequences affiliated with Juya, it was meant to be almost completely randomized, using the dark side and the Force itself to channel the path and direction of the blade. This was highly dangerous for those of Surisu, who had very strict combat form and very strict variations and movements with their lightsabers. In a direct description of Jem-So, it caused for violence, something that should be staunchly against the Jedi way. The way Jem-So was intended to work was to instantly parry an opponent's attack and then move into an offensive strike of your own, swinging your blade as quickly as you can and as heavily as you can, a tactic that was known to end duels nearly instantaneously. However, Anakin Skywalker used a different version of this, creating an almost completely offensive-minded form, levying heavy strike after heavy strike against an opponent. In its purest form, Jem-So was a very acceptable lightsaber form among the Jedi, as it did place a heavy emphasis on defense in its purest form, starting with defense but meeting it with offense. Where it was ultimately changed and altered is the offensive mindset that many Jedi would adopt when using it. Its detractors stated that Jem-So was a variant of lightsaber combat used to dominate an opponent, something that is staunchly against the Jedi way, thus leading more individuals to embrace the darker aspects. Similar to Juya, Jem-So was also a variant of lightsaber combat that was fueled by emotion, even though it was not intended to be. When a Jedi became so engaged in winning a lightsaber duel, they did away with all of their compassion. And again, this is not the Jedi way, with many of its detractors pointing to its similarities to Seven. What's shocking about Jem-So though, is it was not only a favorite of the Jedi Order and Anakin, but also of the Sith, specifically one Sith though, who admired the form a great deal, and who adopted it as his primary lightsaber form, again drawing the connection between Form 7 and Form 5. This individual was Darth Bane. Darth Bane stated that he believed that Forms 5 and 7 should be taught to all Sith, as Bane preferred Form 5 because he was such a physically domineering opponent, and he could use this to his great advantage. In many ways, Bane and Anakin Skywalker are actually similar combatants, using their superior physical skill to dominate an opponent with their blade. Darth Bane was a huge proponent of Jem-So, and encouraged the Sith to use the dark side and their emotions to make the form more powerful, with Darth Bane directly noting that this was difficult to achieve in other lightsaber forms such as Sarisu and even Ataru, even though it was aggressive. This in a sense proves that Gemso does have some sort of alignment with the dark side. Darth Bane personally even stated that he believed that Form 5 for many Sith Lords was superior to Form 7, as he said that many Sith had the bad tendency of losing complete control over their emotion, therefore losing track of their surroundings and ultimately losing a duel as a result of their very ferocity that fuels their blade. This is why Bane would channel his aggression to Gemso, which he believed was more refined. During their climactic duel, in the Revenge of the Sith novelization, it's explained that Dooku himself feels a shift in the duel as Anakin begins to lean more into his emotions, becoming one of the finest specimens of Gemso that Dooku has ever seen, in a power that he did not believe was possible. This is because Anakin Skywalker is no longer using the variation of the form developed by the Jedi. Now, he is using Darth Bane's Gemso, and it is Darth Bane's Gemso that ultimately defeats Dooku. While it is true some Jedi can use Gemso to perfection, holding back and reining in their emotions and simply focusing on ending the duel as quickly as possible with an offensive mindset, Anakin Skywalker and other more volatile Jedi would eventually give in to their strength in the dark side to fuel the form, with it being more akin to a drug and sensing that they're more powerful, pure adrenaline flowing through them, the adrenaline of the dark side. But it is because of the simple fact that they're winning the duel that they lean more heavily into it, the allure of the darkness that Anakin eventually gave into. But now I leave the question up to you, my friends. What are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on Gemso being outlawed by the Jedi Order? Do you believe that it should have been rightfully outlawed, or are you with another large portion of the Jedi that believed that the form was completely fine, and that some Jedi used it to perfection in service of the light? Or are you with the group of Jedi that believe that it leans too heavily and too far into the gifts of the darkness, and should be outlawed and banned from the Order entirely? As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching the channel. May the Force be with you, and I will hopefully see you in another video.